Jake Reynolds pushed his mop bucket down the long corridor of Station Harmony 7, humming an old tune his grandmother used to sing. The night shift was his favorite time to work. No crowds, no pompous alien diplomats looking down at him, just the quiet hum of the station's life support systems and his own voice echoing off the polished floors. He'd been working as a janitor at the Galactic Council's diplomatic quarters for almost 2 years now. The pay was decent, better than anything he could get back on Earth, and honestly, he liked the solitude. During the day, this place was chaos. Aliens from 100 different worlds arguing about trade routes and territorial disputes. But at night? At night it was just Jake and his mop. Tonight he was humming something his grandma taught him when he was 7. Scarborough Fair, she'd called it. Some old English folk song about herbs and lost love. Jake didn't know all the words, but the melody stuck with him. He hummed it whenever he worked, not really thinking about it. Just something to fill the silence. The corridor he was cleaning housed the high-profile guests. The really important ones. Ambassadors, royalty, military commanders. Their doors were twice as tall as normal, made of materials Jake couldn't even pronounce. He'd learned early on not to make eye contact if any of them passed by. Most aliens considered humans to be somewhere between servants and pets. Useful, but not worth acknowledging. As he mopped past one particular suite, he noticed something odd. The door belonged to Princess Vila of the Lumina Empire. He'd seen her once from a distance, and she was hard to forget. The Lumina were beings of light, their bodies glowing with bioluminescent patterns that shifted and changed. They communicated partly through these light displays, creating entire conversations in pulses and waves of color. Absolutely beautiful, if he was being honest. But tonight, there were about a dozen of her attendants clustered outside her door, their light patterns flickering rapidly. Jake's translator device picked up fragments of their conversation. He'd learned that rapid flickering usually meant distress or anxiety in Lumina body language. He slowed his mopping, trying not to look too obvious about eavesdropping. One of the attendants was speaking in a high-pitched tone that the translator rendered as desperate concern. 3 cycles now. She hasn't entered dormancy once. The physicians are running out of options. If this continues, her light will begin to fade permanently. Jake felt a twinge of sympathy. He didn't know much about Lumina biology, but he'd heard rumors about their sleep disorders. Apparently, some of the royal bloodlines had neurological issues that prevented them from sleeping properly. And for a species that regulated their internal light through sleep cycles, that was basically a death sentence. Without rest, their bioluminescence would become unstable, eventually flickering out entirely. He kept pushing his mop, moving past the worried attendants. They didn't even glance at him. To them, he was just part of the background, as noticeable as the air filtration system. Jake dipped his mop back in the bucket and continued down the corridor, transitioning from Scarborough Fair into another old tune. What was it called? Danny Boy, maybe. His grandmother had a whole collection of ancient songs she taught him. Said they were important to remember, even if nobody sang them anymore. He didn't notice the change at first. Didn't see how the faint glow seeping from beneath Princess Vila's door suddenly shifted. The chaotic, irregular pulses smoothed out, falling into a gentle rhythm. Didn't hear how the attendant's frantic conversation stopped mid-sentence. Behind that massive door, Princess Vila lay in her chamber, exhausted beyond measure. She'd been awake for 72 hours by human standards, and her people's medical technology had failed to provide relief. Every experimental treatment, every ancient remedy, every meditation technique, nothing worked. Her light was dimming, and she could feel her consciousness fragmenting at the edges. Then she heard it. A sound unlike anything in Lumina culture. Not a communication signal. Not a warning tone. Not a functional frequency at all. Just a human voice, producing seemingly random vibrations as he performed a menial task. The sound waves passed through her door, through her chambers, and somehow, impossibly, her neural patterns began to synchronize with them. For the first time in weeks, Princess Vila's eyes closed. Her bioluminescent patterns steadied into the slow, rhythmic pulse of deep sleep. Her attendants stared in shocked silence, their own lights frozen in disbelief. Outside in the corridor, Jake Reynolds continued mopping, completely unaware that his grandmother's old songs had just saved an alien princess's life. He hummed his way around a corner, bucket wheels squeaking slightly, already thinking about what he'd have for breakfast when his shift ended. Just another quiet night on Station Harmony 7. Just another human doing a job nobody else wanted, carrying gifts he didn't even know he possessed. Jake arrived for his shift the next evening expecting the usual quiet routine. Instead, he found the corridor outside Princess Vila's suite packed with aliens. Medical equipment was scattered everywhere, their screens displaying charts and readouts that meant nothing to him. Security officers in dark uniforms stood guard, their weapons clearly visible. Something big was happening. He hesitated, gripping his mop handle. Maybe he should come back later, clean this section when things calmed down. But his supervisor would chew him out if he skipped an entire corridor. The diplomatic quarters had to be spotless, no exceptions. Jake took a breath and pushed his bucket forward, trying to make himself as invisible as possible. The crowd parted slightly to let him through, barely acknowledging his presence. Good. That's how he liked it. He started mopping near the wall, keeping his head down and his ears open. A tall crystalline being was arguing with one of the security officers. Jake recognized him from the nameplate that translated on his visor display. Dr. Korath, the princess's chief physician. His voice came through the translator as sharp and urgent. I'm telling you, we detected an unauthorized frequency emission last night. It originated from this corridor at precisely the moment the princess's neural patterns stabilized. The security officer's antenna twitched with annoyance. And I'm telling you, Doctor, we've scanned this entire section twice. There are no hidden devices, no frequency emitters, nothing that could generate the kind of signal you're describing. Then scan again. The readings were unmistakable. Something in this corridor produced a complex harmonic pattern that synchronized with her biology. We've been trying to achieve that result for weeks with our most advanced medical technology, and something here did it by accident. Jake dipped his mop in the soapy water, wrung it out, and started working on a spot near the princess's door. He wasn't really paying attention to what he was doing. His mind was half focused on the conversation, half wondering to what he'd watch on his tablet later. Almost unconsciously, he started humming. Tonight it was Danny Boy, that sad Irish tune about a father and a son going off to war. The effect was immediate and startling. Princess Vila's door suddenly slid open with a soft hiss. A dozen attendants came rushing out, their bioluminescent patterns blazing so bright that Jake had to squint. They were flashing in rapid sequences, colors shifting from deep blue to brilliant gold. Even without understanding their language perfectly, Jake could tell they were excited. Maybe even joyful. One of the attendants rushed up to Dr. Korath, speaking so fast the translator struggled to keep up. She's sleeping. Natural dormancy cycle. Her patterns are stable, synchronized, perfect. It happened again, just like last night. Dr. Korath's crystalline body seemed to sharpen with focus. He pulled out a handheld scanner and started sweeping it across the corridor. The device beeped and chirped, its display lighting up with data. Then it stopped, pointing directly at Jake. Jake froze mid-mop stroke. Every eye in the corridor turned toward him. Well, not exactly eyes. The Lumina had light-sensing organs, the crystalline beings had something like facete lenses, and the security officers had what looked like thermal pits. But they were all staring at him, and Jake suddenly felt very small and very human. Dr. Korath approached slowly, holding his scanner out like it might bite. You. The human. What weaponized frequency device are you carrying? Jake blinked. What? I don't have any device. I'm just a janitor. Impossible. My equipment is detecting a complex harmonic emission originating from your exact position. Variable frequency, multiple overlapping wavelengths, with emotional resonance patterns embedded in the signal structure. The doctor's voice rose with each word. What are you using? Jake looked down at himself. He was wearing his standard cleaning uniform, a name badge, and his translator earpiece. That was it. No devices, no equipment beyond his mop and bucket. I'm not using anything. I was just cleaning and humming. Humming? One of the Lumina attendants stepped forward, their light pattern shifting to a confused orange. What is humming? You know, humming. Making music with your voice closed. Like. Jake demonstrated, humming a few bars of Danny Boy. Dr. Korath's scanner went absolutely crazy. The device nearly jumped out of his hands as it registered the sound, its display flooding with data. The medical team rushed forward, surrounding Jake with their own scanning equipment. He felt like a lab specimen. Fascinating, Dr. Korath breathed. The human is generating the frequency biologically. No technology involved whatsoever. But why? Another physician asked. What is the purpose of this sound production? Is it a warning call? A mating display? A territorial marker? Jake felt his face getting hot. It's not for anything. I just do it. Humans hum when we're working, or when we're happy, or just because. It's not really for a purpose. The aliens exchanged looks of complete bewilderment. A behavior with no survival function? No communication value? No evolutionary advantage? It made no sense to them. Dr. Korath was still staring at his scanner. These harmonic patterns, they're chaotic but organized. Random but structured. And the emotional undertones. He looked up at Jake with something like awe. Your species produces therapeutic frequencies as a recreational activity. I guess? I mean, I just learned these songs from my grandma. They're old, from Earth. I hum them because they're nice. One of the attendants spoke up, their light pattern now a soft, hopeful green. Can you do it again? The princess, she needs it. She's awake now, but if she doesn't return to dormancy soon, her condition will deteriorate. Jake shrugged. Sure, I guess. But I was just cleaning. That's when I usually hum. Dr. Korath made a gesture that the translator interpreted as frustrated acceptance. Then clean. Please. Just do whatever you were doing. Jake went back to his mop, feeling dozens of alien eyes watching his every move. He dipped the mop in the bucket, wrung it out, and started working on the floor. After a moment, self-consciousness fading, he started humming again. Something about the repetitive motion, the simple task, it just felt natural to hum along. Within 30 seconds, the attendants near the princess's door began flashing excitedly. Princess Vila was falling asleep again, her bioluminescent patterns evening out into the steady rhythm of deep rest. Dr. Korath stared at his scanner, then at Jake, then back at the scanner. Incredible. Absolutely incredible. Jake just kept mopping. He had 3 more corridors to clean before his shift ended, and apparently now he was some kind of alien sleep medicine. His supervisor was going to love this. The Lumina High Council meeting happened without Jake even knowing about it. While he slept in his tiny quarters after his shift, representatives from one of the galaxy's most powerful empires were discussing him. Specifically, discussing how much money it would take to convince a human janitor to hum beside their dying princess. When Jake woke up 14 hours later to find 3 official-looking aliens waiting outside his door, he thought he was being fired. Or arrested. Possibly both. Instead, they offered him more credits than he'd earn in 20 lifetimes of mopping floors. The lead negotiator, a Lumina official whose light patterns suggested extreme importance, laid out the deal through Jake's translator. Princess Vila's condition was deteriorating rapidly. Every hour she went without proper sleep, her neural pathways degraded further. Their medical technology couldn't replicate what Jake's humming did. They tried. Spent the entire day running simulations, building frequency generators, programming audio systems. Nothing worked. They needed him. Just for a few hours each night, until their physicians could figure out a permanent solution. A week, maybe 2 at most. In exchange, Jake would receive enough money to retire, buy a house back on Earth, never work another day in his life. Jake said yes before the negotiator finished talking. He wasn't stupid. This was the opportunity of a lifetime. That evening, they led him into Princess Vila's private medical suite. The room was enormous, easily 5 times the size of Jake's entire living quarters. Soft lighting pulsed gently from the walls. Medical equipment surrounded an elevated platform where the princess rested. She looked worse than Jake expected. Her bioluminescence flickered irregularly, like a dying light bulb. Dark patches marred her usually radiant form. Dr. Korath and his entire medical team waited nearby, scanners ready, monitoring equipment humming. They'd set up a small chair for Jake about 10 feet from the princess's platform. Very official. Very medical. Very uncomfortable. Whenever you're ready, Dr. Korath said, gesturing to the chair. Jake sat down. Cleared his throat. Everyone stared at him expectantly. The princess's eyes were open, watching him with an intensity that made his skin prickle. He'd never been the center of attention like this. Never had an audience. He was a janitor, for crying out loud. He cleaned toilets and mopped floors. Nobody watched him work. He started humming. Or tried to. What came out was awkward and strained, more of a weird throat noise than actual music. He stopped, tried again. This time it sounded forced, mechanical. Like he was trying too hard. Nothing happened. Princess Vila's patterns remained chaotic. The monitoring equipment showed no change. Jake kept trying. He ran through every song he could remember. Scarborough Fair, Danny Boy, What a Wonderful World, even Happy Birthday. Nothing worked. The melodies came out wrong, too self-conscious, too aware of being observed. It was like trying to fall asleep when someone's watching you. The more he focused on it, the more impossible it became. After 20 minutes, Dr. Korath checked his equipment with growing concern. The frequencies are correct, but something's missing. The harmonic resonance isn't forming. I don't understand, one of the technicians said. He's producing the same sounds. Why isn't it working? Jake felt sweat beading on his forehead. All that money, the chance to change his life, and he was failing. He tried humming again, but it came out even worse. His throat felt tight. His hands were shaking slightly. Princess Vila's condition monitor started beeping. Her patterns were becoming more erratic. An attendant rushed forward with some kind of stabilizing device. This isn't working, Dr. Korath said, his crystalline form dimming with disappointment. We're wasting time. We need to try something else. Jake stood up from the chair, frustrated with himself. I don't get it. Last night it worked fine. I was just doing my job and humming, and now? He trailed off. Just doing my job. That was it, wasn't it? Last night he hadn't been trying to hum. He'd been mopping, and the humming just happened naturally. Without thinking. Without an audience. Can I borrow some cleaning supplies? Jake asked suddenly. Dr. Korath blinked, or did whatever crystalline beings do when confused. What? Why? Just trust me. I need a mop and a bucket. And some floor cleaner. The medical team exchanged uncertain glances, but one of the attendants hurried off. 5 minutes later, they returned with Jake's familiar cleaning cart. The same beat-up mop he used every night. The same squeaky bucket. Even the same brand of industrial floor cleaner that smelled like fake lemons. Jake grabbed the mop, filled the bucket from a water dispenser in the corner, and added a splash of cleaner. The familiar chemical smell hit his nose. Good. Normal. He could work with this. He started mopping the medical suite's floor. It didn't really need cleaning, the place was spotless. But that didn't matter. The motion was what counted. The repetitive swish of the mop, the rhythm of dip, ring, swipe. His body fell into the familiar pattern, muscle memory taking over. And without even thinking about it, he started humming. This time it was What a Wonderful World. Louis Armstrong's version, the way his grandma used to play it on her old music player. Jake's mind drifted as he worked. He thought about breakfast. Wondered if the station cafeteria still had those weird purple pastries he kind of liked. Mentally catalogued which corridors he'd need to clean tomorrow. The mop made soft sounds against the floor. Swish, swish, swish. His humming blended with it, creating a simple rhythm. Nothing fancy. Nothing performative. Just a guy doing his job, making noise because it felt right. Princess Vila's eyes slowly closed. Her bioluminescent patterns shifted, the chaotic flickering smoothing into gentle, rhythmic pulses. Deep blue fading to soft violet, then back again. Steady. Peaceful. The monitoring equipment chirped softly as her neural patterns synchronized. She was sleeping. Really, truly sleeping. Dr. Korath stared at his scanner, then at Jake, then back at his scanner. His whole crystalline body seemed to vibrate with excitement and confusion. It's working. By the void, it's actually working. The other physicians crowded around their equipment, chattering rapidly. The attendants' light patterns blazed with relief and joy. They'd been watching their princess slowly die for weeks, and now a human janitor with a mop was saving her life. Jake just kept cleaning, moving around the medical equipment, humming his way through the song. He was in his element now. This he could do. This was easy. An hour later, Princess Vila remained in deep, restorative sleep. Her bioluminescence had stabilized completely, showing healthy patterns the medical team hadn't seen in months. Jake finished mopping the entire suite, then started on the adjoining corridors because, well, he was there anyway and they needed cleaning. Dr. Korath approached him carefully, like he was some kind of rare, fragile creature. Mr. Reynolds, I don't think you understand what you've just accomplished. We've been trying to induce this state for 73 cycles. Our best technology, our most skilled physicians, every treatment we know. And you did it with a cleaning tool and no conscious effort. Jake wrung out his mop. Yeah, well. I guess I just needed to stop trying so hard. Works better when I'm not thinking about it. But that's precisely the problem, Dr. Korath said. We can't replicate something that requires not thinking. We can't synthesize unconscious contentment. We can't program relaxed focus into a machine. The full weight of the situation settled on Jake. They couldn't fix this. Couldn't cure the princess. Couldn't create some device to replace him. The treatment was him. Just him, being himself, doing something completely ordinary. He was going to be mopping this suite every night for a very long time. 3 weeks into his new routine, Jake had settled into a strange kind of normal. Every night he'd show up at Princess Vila's suite with his cleaning cart, mop the floors that didn't really need mopping, and hum his grandmother's old songs while an alien princess slept peacefully nearby. The pay was incredible, the work was easy, and he'd stopped feeling self-conscious about the whole thing. What he hadn't expected was for the princess to start waking up during his shifts. It happened gradually at first. He'd be halfway through Scarborough Fair when he'd notice her bioluminescent patterns changing, shifting from the deep sleep state to something more active. Her eyes would open, and she'd just watch him work. Not in a creepy way, more like she was curious. Jake would nod awkwardly, keep humming, keep mopping. Then one night she spoke. Her voice came through his translator as melodic and soft, with an accent he couldn't quite place. "What is that song about?" Jake paused mid-swipe with his mop. In 3 weeks, she'd never said a word to him. He'd started to wonder if she even could talk, or if the Lumina only communicated through their light patterns. Scarborough Fair? It's an old Earth song. Really old. Like, centuries. But what does it mean? The words about herbs. Parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme. Why those specific plants? Jake had never really thought about it. Honestly, I'm not sure. My grandma said each herb meant something. Love, strength, loyalty, courage maybe? The song's about a guy asking his former love to do impossible tasks. It's kind of sad, actually. Princess Vila's light patterns shifted to a contemplative pale blue. Your people create songs about sadness? About impossible tasks and lost love? Sure. We've got songs about pretty much everything. Happy stuff, sad stuff, angry stuff. Wars and peace. Good times and bad times. Jake dipped his mop back in the bucket. Music's just part of being human, I guess. Over the following nights, their conversations grew longer. Princess Vila would ask about the songs, and Jake would explain as best he could. When he hummed "What a Wonderful World," she wanted to know about Earth's trees and skies and seas. When he hummed "Danny Boy," she asked about families and why humans felt such strong connections to their parents. Jake found himself telling her things he hadn't talked about in years. About his grandmother who raised him after his parents died. About growing up poor in Detroit. About how he'd come to space because there was nothing left for him on Earth except memories and an empty apartment. The princess listened to everything. She seemed fascinated by the most mundane details of human life. The fact that humans ate 3 meals a day. That they had pets just for companionship. That they created art and music for no practical reason except that it made them feel something. "Your species is very inefficient," she observed one night, but her light patterns suggested she meant it as a compliment. "Yeah, we get that a lot from you advanced types," Jake said with a grin. "But being efficient sounds kind of boring, if I'm being honest." What Jake didn't know was that while he and the princess talked and he hummed his simple songs, someone else was watching very carefully. Duke Sareth was Princess Vila's cousin, next in line for the Lumina throne. He'd been carefully positioning himself for years, waiting for the princess's condition to finally claim her life. He'd quietly ensured certain research data never reached her medical team. Had blocked funding for experimental treatments. Nothing too obvious, just enough to make sure nature took its course. Then a human janitor had ruined everything. Sareth watched the security footage of Jake mopping and humming, watched his cousin sleeping peacefully for the first time in months. This was unacceptable. The human was a complication, but humans were fragile. Accidents happened all the time on space stations. Jake's shuttle incident happened on a Tuesday. He was heading back to his quarters after his shift, riding the automated transport that ran between the diplomatic section and the worker housing modules. The trip took about 15 minutes through the station's infrastructure tunnels. Jake usually dozed during the ride, tired from a night of mopping and talking. He was half asleep when the shuttle's emergency alarms started blaring. The automated voice was calm despite the crisis. "Oxygen system failure. Emergency protocols engaged. Please remain calm." Jake's eyes snapped open. The shuttle had stopped in the middle of a tunnel, its lights flickering. He could already feel it, the air getting thinner, harder to breathe. His heart started pounding. The emergency oxygen masks that should have dropped from the ceiling stayed firmly in place. The emergency call button didn't respond when he pressed it. This wasn't a normal malfunction. Someone had sabotaged this shuttle. Jake tried forcing the doors open, but they were sealed tight. His lungs were burning now, his vision starting to blur at the edges. He pounded on the windows, knowing nobody could hear him, knowing he was alone in a tunnel where maintenance crews only checked once a week. He was going to die here. In a broken shuttle, in a tunnel, light years from Earth. And the worst part was that Princess Vila would probably die too, when there was nobody to hum her to sleep. Back in her suite, Princess Vila woke suddenly from her rest. Something was wrong. She couldn't explain how she knew, but she felt it. A disturbance, an absence. Jake should have finished his shift by now, but the sensation of his presence, that strange human warmth she'd come to recognize, was fading. She'd been monitoring more than just her sleep cycles. Against protocol, she'd accessed the station's security systems weeks ago, curious about the human who saved her life. She'd learned about his roots, his schedules, his simple life. And right now, his shuttle's emergency beacon was offline in Section 7B. Princess Vila left her chambers for the first time in months. Her attendants tried to stop her, worried about her condition, but her bioluminescence blazed with an intensity they hadn't seen since before her illness. She was still weak, still needed the nightly sessions with Jake to maintain stability, but rage and fear gave her strength. She stormed into the station's security command center, her light patterns so fierce that the guards stepped back instinctively. Section 7B Worker Shuttle. Override the lockdown. Now. The security chief stammered. Your Highness, we have no reports of. I said now. They opened the shuttle remotely. Emergency crews found Jake unconscious, barely breathing. They got him to medical just in time, pumping oxygen back into his starved lungs, stabilizing his vitals. He'd survive, but it had been close. Too close. While Jake recovered in the medical bay, Princess Vila demanded a full investigation. And because she was royalty and because she was angrier than anyone had ever seen her, they actually listened. Within hours, they'd found the evidence. The tampered oxygen systems. The disabled emergency protocols. The digital fingerprints leading back to Duke Saratha's personal network. When Jake woke up 2 days later, his throat raw and his head pounding, Princess Vila was sitting beside his bed. Her light patterns were a soft, worried green. You saved my life, she said simply. Jake's voice came out as a hoarse whisper. Pretty sure it's supposed to be the other way around. You've been saving my life every night for weeks. I simply returned the favor once. As Jake recovered over the next few days, he learned about the conspiracy. About Duke Sarath and his ambitions. About how close he'd come to dying in that tunnel. The station authorities had arrested the Duke and 3 of his co-conspirators. There would be trials, probably executions given Lumina law. But more than that, something had shifted between Jake and the princess. Before, he'd been her treatment. A medical necessity. A means to an end. Now there was something else. Gratitude, yes, but also understanding. She'd seen his life, learned his stories, understood what made him human. And he'd seen her, not as some distant royal, but as a person fighting to survive. The night Jake returned to work, his hands still shaky from the ordeal, Princess Vila smiled when he walked in with his mop and bucket. I'm glad you're back, she said. Yeah, well. You still need your sleep. Jake started filling his bucket. Besides, the floor's getting dirty. It wasn't, and they both knew it. But Jake grabbed his mop anyway, and started humming the first bars of What a Wonderful World, and Princess Vila closed her eyes with something that looked a lot like contentment. Dr. Koratha's breakthrough came on a Wednesday morning, 6 weeks after Jake had started his nightly sessions with Princess Vila. The doctor burst into the medical suite with more energy than Jake had ever seen from the usually reserved crystalline being. I figured it out, he announced, his body practically vibrating with excitement. I finally understand why it works. Jake paused mid-mop. The humming thing. Yes. We've been approaching this completely wrong. We kept trying to replicate the frequency, the harmonic patterns, the wavelengths. But that's not what matters. Dr. Korath pulled up a holographic display, showing brain scans and neural patterns that looked like abstract art to Jake. It's not about the sound itself. It's about the intention behind it. Princess Vila sat up from her resting platform, her light patterns shifting to curious yellow. Explain. Humans hum when they're in a specific mental state. Content. Relaxed. Focused on simple, repetitive tasks. That emotional signature, that particular combination of peace and purposeful activity, it gets transmitted through their vocalization. The neural pattern of unself-conscious contentment creates a resonance with lumina biology that we simply cannot artificially reproduce. Jake wrung out his mop, processing this. So you're saying it works because I'm not stressed out while I'm mopping? Precisely. When you tried humming on command that first night, you were anxious, self-conscious, trying too hard. The frequencies were technically correct, but the emotional resonance was completely wrong. When you're simply doing your job, humming without thinking about it, your brain produces a specific pattern. That pattern is what triggers the princess's sleep cycle. One of the other physicians chimed in, their translator making them sound equally excited. We've been studying Lumina neurological evolution for the past month. Our species spent millennia pursuing technological advancement and cultural refinement. We systematically bred out what we considered inefficient emotional responses. Contentment without purpose. Joy without function. Peace without productivity. Princess Vila's light patterns dimmed slightly. And that created our sleep disorder. Exactly. The condition isn't really a disease. It's an evolutionary consequence. Our biology is fighting against what our culture demanded of it. We engineered away the very neural patterns necessary for natural rest cycles. Dr. Korath gestured at Jake. Humans never did that. They kept their inefficiency, their purposeless behaviors, their emotional irregularity. And ironically, that makes them more biologically stable in certain ways. Jake leaned on his mop handle. So basically, you guys are too advanced for your own good, and I'm just backward enough to accidentally fix it. That's a crude but essentially accurate summary, yes. The implications hit everyone in the room simultaneously. Princess Vila stood, her full height impressive even in her weakened state. If this is true, if our cultural evolution caused this condition, then the solution isn't more technology. It's relearning what we lost. Over the next week, Princess Vila compiled her research. She had Dr. Korath's medical data, centuries of Lumina health records, and her own experiences. The pattern was undeniable. As Lumina society had become more technologically sophisticated, sleep disorders had increased. As they'd eliminated inefficient emotional responses, their biology had begun breaking down in subtle ways. She requested an audience with the Lumina High Council. They assembled in the Grand Chamber on the Lumina homeworld, transmitted via hologram to Station Harmony 7. Dozens of the Empire's most powerful leaders, their bioluminescent forms creating a dazzling display of light and color. Princess Vila stood before them, and Jake stood slightly behind her. She'd insisted he be present, despite his protests that he was just a janitor and had no business at an Imperial Council meeting. Honored members of the High Council, she began, her light patterns formal and commanding. I come before you not to discuss my illness, but to discuss our collective illness. A sickness we have inflicted upon ourselves through our own success. She presented the data. The correlation between technological advancement and health disorders. The elimination of purposeless behaviors and the rise of neurological conditions. The way their own biology was rejecting what their culture had become. For generations, we have looked down upon species like humanity. We called them primitive, inefficient, emotionally unstable. We considered their attachment to art, music, and simple pleasures to be evolutionary dead ends. Her light patterns shifted, becoming softer, more vulnerable. We were wrong. Jake shifted uncomfortably as dozens of holographic eyes turned toward him. Princess Vila continued. Humans create music for no reason except that it brings them joy. They perform repetitive tasks while humming songs their ancestors taught them. They find peace in simplicity. And these supposedly inefficient behaviors? They maintain a neurological balance that we have lost. A council member objected, their light patterns sharp with skepticism. You're suggesting we abandon our cultural progress? Return to primitive emotional states. I'm suggesting we learn from species we've dismissed. That we reintroduce what we've lost before it destroys us. Princess Vila's patterns blazed with conviction. I propose a cultural exchange program with Earth. Not to study their technology, but to study their joy. Their music. Their ability to find contentment in simple tasks. The chamber erupted in flashing lights, the Lumina equivalent of shocked debate. The idea was radical, almost heretical. Learning from humans? Adopting their inefficient ways? But Princess Vila had the data, and she had herself as living proof. Without Jake's unconscious gift, she would be dead. Without human inefficiency, Lumina biology would continue breaking down. The debate lasted hours. Jake stood there the whole time, trying not to fall asleep on his feet, wondering how his life had gotten this weird. A year ago, he'd been mopping floors in Detroit. Now he was at the center of an interstellar cultural crisis. Finally, the High Council voted. The measure passed, barely. Earth would be contacted. Cultural exchange programs would be established. Lumina citizens would be encouraged to explore art, music, and purposeless activities. It would take generations to undo the damage, but they had to start somewhere. Duke Sareth and his co-conspirators were sentenced to permanent exile, their lights to be dimmed in shame. The princess's condition, while not cured, became manageable. They brought in a rotating team of human musicians from Earth, each one well paid to simply be themselves, to create and perform without pressure or expectation. But Princess Vila still requested Jake specifically for her evening sessions. The other musicians were talented, classically trained, technically perfect. But there was something about a janitor humming old folk songs while mopping that the fancy performers couldn't replicate. Jake was offered a new title, Cultural Ambassador of Simple Joys, which sounded incredibly pretentious. He accepted on one condition: he still got to mop floors sometimes. Because that's when he did his best humming, and honestly, he kind of missed it. Princess Vila had fully recovered, her bioluminescence radiant and strong. She'd become the leading voice for cultural reform in the Lumina Empire, advocating for inefficiency and emotional authenticity. She traveled across the empire, giving speeches, changing minds, rebuilding what her species had lost. But she always came back to Station Harmony 7. And when she did, Jake would be there with his mop and bucket. One evening, about 3 months after the council's decision, Jake was humming his way through Scarborough Fair when Princess Vila started humming along. It was clumsy and off-key, her vocal structure not really designed for human melodies, but she was trying. Jake grinned. "You're getting better at that. I've had a good teacher." Her light patterns shifted to warm gold, which Jake had learned meant happiness. "Though I still don't understand why parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme." "Nobody does. That's kind of the point." They stood there in comfortable silence, a human janitor and an alien princess, connected by the simplest and most profound thing in the universe, the ability to find peace in purposeless joy. Jake dipped his mop one more time and kept humming, because that's what humans did. They hummed while they worked, they sang without reason, they found happiness in the small moments. And sometimes, just sometimes, that was enough to change an empire. The galaxy was learning what Earth had always known. That efficiency isn't everything. That progress without joy is just motion without meaning. That the most advanced solution sometimes looks like a guy with a mop, humming his grandmother's old songs, simply because it feels right.